It's almost a case of deja vu. I think I saw that opening slide a couple of weeks ago. Thank you very much for watching this episode of In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. I'm Eric Marsh, Executive Director. Glad you're able to join us for what hopefully will be an informative and interesting conversation with Elijah Welch, engineer for the Richmond Sanitary District. But before we get to that, I need to talk about an In Focus program that we are going to do in a couple of weeks. We're going to take next week off, run a rerun, and then we're coming back with a special 90-minute In Focus program where we want to be able to answer your questions. We will have representatives of Reed Health, Meridian Health Services, and Centerstone here in studio live. We'd like to see if we can get your questions ahead of time. We want to be very mindful of people's privacy. But if you have a question about the opioid problem of a friend, a family member, yourself, you're just trying to understand what's going on. You're trying to understand maybe some of the options that are available now for treatment that weren't available a few years ago. Whatever the case may be, we're asking you to send your questions ahead of time. You can email those questions to wctv@iue.edu. We will be taking your questions during the program, but if we can get them ahead of time, we can get those questions to our guests, and they'll be able to research and make sure that they have those answers for you. So again, coming up on the 26th of this month, it will be a special 90-minute In Focus talking about the opioid problem, and really it is designed to answer your questions. So please send your questions to wctv@iue.edu, and we'll be very happy to try to get our panel from Reed Health, Meridian Services, Health Services, and Centerstone to be able to answer your questions. It's a problem that is affecting not just this area, not just this state, but the entire country. Indiana University announced that they were spending $50 million to do some looking in research and development. That was announced just the other day. So be sure to participate in this community dialogue. Joining us for tonight's In Focus is Elijah Welch. As I mentioned, he is the engineer for the Richmond Sanitary District. I assume are there others besides you?
Yes, we do have another registered professional engineer on staff. So, okay. Yeah, we both tackle the projects that are at hand. So,
give us a little bit of background on who you are, why you're with the Sanitary District, how long you've been there. Are you a native of Richmond? Just
Sure, yeah. Well, I actually grew up just north of here in Lynn, Indiana, or just outside of Lynn. I went to Randolph Southern High School, so not too far down the road. Spent a lot of time in Richmond, but then went to Purdue for 4 years and got my bachelor's in civil engineering. Wanted to move back to the area, and was lucky enough to find something with the city. I started out actually in the city engineer's office, and after about 6 months or so, moved to the sanitary district and have been there ever since. So I'm working on a little over 13 years, almost 14 years, with the sanitary district, and you know, through schooling, through Purdue, never really thought that I would end up necessarily in wastewater. You know, you go to civil engineering, and a lot of people think of bridges and buildings and things like that, but really ended up in the right spot. I love what I do. And I feel like we're making a difference for the community, for the environment, and all the different aspects that we get to work on. So definitely challenging and fun to be a part of. So.
Okay. Glad you're here. Glad you're able to join us. The main reason we're having this discussion, not that talking about sanitary sewers on a regular basis just isn't the most fun thing.
It's fun for me, but not everybody seems to.
But not everybody sees it that way.
No, definitely not.
But you went before Richmond Common Council, and you have talked to the sanitary board, and we cover those sanitary meetings, about the combined sewer overflow separation thingy. I am not going to sit here for the next hour and act like I'm an engineer because I'm not. So what I'm going to ask you to do is kind of break some of this down so that those of us that didn't go to Purdue understand what's going on, why this needs to be done, even beyond the fact that we're under a court order to do
Sure.
it, why it needs to be done, and why you have to take more money out of our pocket in order to get it done.
Sure,
Is that a simple enough way to do it?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start out with just kind of the definition of what is a combined sewer overflow, and I think we've got a slide to help show people what that is. But it's basically a sewer that takes both stormwater and sanitary flows all in one pipe. And these were legal back in the 1800s and early 1900s when, the term was dilution is the solution. So, the cities weren't as big, communities weren't as big, so they would take all their wastewater and put it in one pipe. And when it rained, the stormwater also went in that one pipe. And it went directly to the river. And I've got a map in my office that kind of shows this. It's all the sewers in Richmond in 1915. And they all went directly to the river. So then in the 1930s, there were some Interceptor Sewers put in, and the treatment plant was built on the south side of town. These Interceptors picked up that flow from town, and it took it down and treated the wastewater. But you still had a lot of combined sewers. So when it rained, the stormwater entered the sewer, and the sewer wasn't big enough to take all that flow down to the treatment plant, and the treatment plant wasn't big enough to treat it if it were to get down there. So they built overflow points along the sewers, and when the levels in the sewer got high enough, it would overflow a dam or a weir, and then it would go out into the river. So that was legal and acceptable for a lot of years. And then in 1972, the Clean Water Act came around, and that's really the regulatory mechanism that we're trying to follow, that we're building things around. So since 1972, there were a couple periods of times when Richmond had done work, CSO work, and the first one happened in the early 80s. And I think we've got a slide also to show some of the breakdown of when some of that happened. But the early 80s, there was actually a lot of funding available. So the treatment plant got expanded, a lot of separate sanitary sewers got installed, a lot of separation was done. And Richmond paid, I think, 10 or 15% of the total bill for that, and I think it was in the, $30 to $40 million range. It was a very large project overall, and fortunately, we didn't have to pay a lot for that. And that's actually when sewer rates even came about. So in 1981, the first sanitary sewer rate was put in place.
Really?
To
I
help
didn't
pay
realize it was that late.
Yes, yeah. So before that, it was completely tax-based, and at that point in time, in order to pay for the upgrades, a sewer rate was put in place. So, so we have that, and then some work had been done in the 90s, and some plans have been submitted to IDEM. So IDEM is the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. Okay. They're the ones that we deal with directly. So it's a state agency. And basically EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency on the federal level, have went and they've said, okay, IDEM, it's your responsibility to enforce the Clean Water Act, so that's why we're dealing with IDEM. Now, some of the really large communities like Indianapolis and Columbus, Ohio, I think Fort Wayne, Evansville now, but Evansville's a different situation. We might get into that maybe later. But
they sound like a completely different situation.
Yeah, and we do not want to be like Evansville by any means. So, but they have consent decrees. So those communities are dealing directly with EPA, but we are dealing with IDEM, with the state agency, which is really.
This is not a matter of somebody came into Richmond, saw what we were doing, sued us, and we're the only ones having to do this. This is not a Richmond or Wayne County only problem.
It is not. There are over 100 other communities in Indiana alone that are CSO communities. And so we're in the same boat as a lot of other communities in Indiana. We're an older community. We were established early, and therefore have a lot of old infrastructure. So we have some of those old problems that need corrected, and that's what this plan really is a part of. So. So then, eventually, in the late 2007 range, there was a court order, and basically that court order said you have to develop a long-term control plan that IDEM approves, and then implement that over a period of time.
Let's just for a second. If we were making some improvements, and you said improvements had been made, how did the court order come about? Who sued in order to
so
get the court
basically,
involved?
the state of Indiana sued or took action against the city, and that's when basically came to an agreement, just like all those other communities in Indiana that went through the same process, came to agreement with the Wayne County courts, and then that agreement references the long-term control plan, which is ultimately a document that's approved by IDEM. And so that over the next 3 years or so, there was a lot of planning effort, investigation, different things that went into formulating a plan. Really, a lot of negotiation between us and IDEM, and we had a consultant on board to help through that process. Ones that have been involved with other communities, and really we went through that process and came together with a plan. And really, the long-term control plan as a whole is supposed to be a document that, in the most effective and efficient way possible, get you to a point to meet the regulatory requirements for our combined sewer overflows. So our document includes combined sewer overflow projects. We also had some SSO issues, or sanitary sewer overflows, that were happening at the same time as we were negotiating the document. And so we had done some of those projects, but we were able to incorporate a few of those projects as well. So sanitary sewer overflow is kind of the same thing as a combined sewer overflow, only they're not legal at all or permitted at all. So if you have an overflow in a system like that, even if it's due to wet weather, it is strictly prohibited and not even protected through the CSO document. So in the long-term control plan, it's really some benefit to us to be able to incorporate those few projects as well, because it gave us a level of protection for those overflows until we could get those fixed. And it went toward the financial aspect of how we did our long-term control plan. It helped really reduce the overall cost of that as well. So,
okay, you've had some work done, so you've had a chance to kind of go through a couple of rounds of this. Some before the court order, some after the court order. You went before Richmond Common Council 5 years ago?
Yes, we were, the last one was 2012, 2013, okay. And then we had done it once before, I think 2009.
Okay. And there are certain projects that have to be done. This has to be completed. There is a deadline. This isn't just something that can be pushed into eternity.
Yes, exactly. So
what are we up against?
Yeah, there's an implementation schedule as part of the long-term control plan, and it's a 20-year program. And not all communities got 20 years. 20 was the longest that you could have, but we were able to negotiate a 20-year implementation period because of several different factors, socioeconomic type indicators, and median household income. A lot of different things went into painting that picture of how long we should get to implement our plan. So we negotiated a 20-year plan, which gave us really as much flexibility and time to be able to phase in everything at the appropriate time, appropriate schedule. As I've mentioned before, a lot of the projects that we're doing build upon each other. So you do one project, and before you can do the next one, this one has to be completed. And you want to step back and take a look at how successful were you in implementing that project, and did it do what you thought it would do? So, we design a project. Some of the projects have models that are created, and they project what happens after it's built with certain size rain events. So those models are good, but ultimately it's based on some assumptions, and real world, once it gets built, could always be a little bit different. So you want to verify the results basically once it happens, and make sure if there's any change, either positive or negative, you want to account for that in the future projects. So That's a regular practice, and actually is part of the schedule that's built into the long-term control plan. So yeah, we are, 2010 is when our long-term control plan was approved. So 2030 is the very end of the plan, but there's different milestone dates within that. So certain projects have certain deadlines that are associated with them, and every year we have to make a report to IDEM on the status of everything. So what did we do that year? Was there a certain milestone project that was completed that needed to be reported on? And then beyond that, those post-construction monitoring pieces that we do, those also get formally submitted to IDEM as a separate document as well. So they have a database, and you know, if you were to miss a deadline, they're going to be calling you, and you know, so that's not the place that we want to be. I think being proactive with how we go about doing things. You know, we've not missed any deadlines. We've seen communities that have pushed back, and Evansville is the prime example of that. They had been dealing with IDEM. And decided they wanted to say they weren't going to do anything. Well, they then started dealing with EPA. They hired expensive Washington, D.C. lawyers and fought with them for several years, and ended up with a plan that was more expensive than originally conceived. They had to do it faster, so the rates increased quicker, and they were fined about $500,000 for kind of that whole process.
On top of all of that.
Yes, right. So the cost to the ratepayers ended up being more than what it should have been.
Okay. Let's backtrack a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some of the areas that you have gotten done, and I assume you've had time to take a look at those, do that assessment that you were talking about.
Yep.
So what has improved from the time you all first started this program to now? For people that have lived in the same house for 20 years in certain parts of this community, what's better for them that this has created?
Sure, and we'll go back to some of the projects that were done really before the plan was approved. And we knew at the time a plan was coming, and we knew these particular projects would be part of the plan. But if you recall in the paper or on the radio or wherever, there were a lot of times, almost every time it rained, there were basement backups. So we did several projects, the Southeast Basin project, a wet weather lift station at Southwest 4th and E Street. So both of those projects were associated with bypass pumping that we had done. So at one period of time, we would go out and set 7 or 8 pumps throughout the collection system and actually pump out of a sanitary sewer and into a storm sewer when it rained. And this was to prevent people's basements from backing up.
You pumped out of a sanitary sewer
into
a storm sewer.
Yes. So not legal, but it prevented backups of people's homes. So, and these are some of the projects that we did, and so a parallel interceptor on Southeast Basin. Now we have not set a pump in 4 or 5 years, probably. So now, even though the sewer starts to rise, instead of needing to go to a storm sewer, it's this parallel interceptor is there. It goes into this interceptor and goes down to the treatment plant to be treated. And kind of to give an overview of the impact that that's had at the treatment plant. Mm-hmm. And I know we have a slide, and we might get to that in a little bit. Our treatment plant is rated at 36 million gallons a day. So that's peak. We can only sustain that for maybe 6 hours or so. We can do 18 million gallons a day, every day, all day long. But when we get peak flows, we can do it for a short amount of time. Right now, we are seeing over 80 million gallons a day peak flow get to the treatment plant when it rains. And we did not have, so this is a picture of our treatment plant and our aeration basins, part of the treatment process. We did not have that. We had peaked out, I think, in the 40s or maybe 50 million gallon a day range. So that flow that used to be being pumped into a storm sewer or overflow a manhole out in the system or go out through our CSOs is now getting down to the treatment plant. And we're able to push as much flow through the treatment plant as possible. Now we still have an overflow at the treatment plant, but eventually at the very end of the long-term control plan, there's a high-rate treatment facility that will get installed. So we put that at the end of the plan for two reasons. One, it gives us time to do all the rest of the projects and then look to see how much flow are we actually going to get at the treatment plant during these storm events, and how big does that facility need to be. So one, we don't want to build it too early and either build it too big, you pay too much money and you overbuilt something which isn't efficient, or too small and it doesn't do what we need it to do, and now you have to go back and retrofit something else to give it more capacity, and that ultimately and then costs more money as well. So we want to make sure we're getting the right size at the right time. The other piece of that is technology for high rate treatment facilities has changed a lot really just in the past 10 years. My hope is there'll be even more improvements in the next 5 to 8 years as we look at actually choosing a final system for the high rate treatment facility. But the good thing is we have a couple options. We have one in a long-term control plan, but we're seeing other ones be put online, and it'll give us a chance to be able to really evaluate those and hear from other communities that have had those online, and be able to pick the right solution at the end of the project for our needs. So
let's try to put some numbers on this to make this a little bit understandable. When I moved to town in 1988, it wouldn't even take a heavy rain, but we'd get rain and we'd get these announcements from the sanitary district. Combined sewer overflow alert,
yep.
Don't swim in the river
Right.
downstream of this. And it seemed like those were monthly, maybe even more than that in heavy rain periods. Around that time, as you look at the number, how many of those alerts were going out on a regular basis, approximately, if you had to guess?
In the 80s, well, here's something. At that point in time, there were 40 to 40, I think it was exactly 42 overflow points, so CSOs that had discharge locations that would go into the river. So 42 points that would overflow. Not that they all overflowed every time.
Right.
We currently have 4 overflow points. So yeah, I don't know exactly how many times a year back.
But obviously,
in the
taking
80s.
it from 42 to 4 has made a dramatic difference.
It
in
has.
when those go.
And now, even from when I started, or even 7 or 8 years ago, the amount of rain it takes to overflow is a lot more than it takes now. And everybody always asks, well, how much rain does it take? And it really kind of depends. Depends on the total amount, the intensity of the rain. So the harder it comes,
how fast it comes in.
Right. What were the ground conditions before? I mean, did we just go through a period like we had earlier this year when the ground was super saturated? You have a lot of infiltration at that point, so it doesn't take as much rain to create an overflow at that point, because some of the capacity in the system is already being eaten up by the infiltration in the system. So, but yeah, we still on average would have 40 to 45 overflows every year. At the end of this, there'll still be overflows, but they'll be treated overflows. So we will reduce the overflows, and the treatment that happens isn't full treatment like it would go through our treatment plant, but it's primary and secondary treatment and then disinfection, so kill the bacteria before it gets discharged into the river. So,
from everything that you've seen, from what you've studied from that point to this one, are you all, and you mentioned you don't want to overbuild, you don't want to underbuild, with everything that you've had a chance to take a look at from the numbers from the system, are we on the right track? Is everything being built the way that it is, or have you had to go back and make tweaks for what you've done?
We've actually been very successful in the projects we've completed so far. So even from the early ones where we were trying to combat the pumps out in the system, since those were completed, we've not pumped in the system, and we haven't gotten the calls about basement backups. I mean, as a sewer utility, you're always going to have a call here and there when it rains or when something happens with the basement backup. just from a root ball or something that happens in the system, and that happens whether you're a combined sewer community or not. But the amount of calls that we used to receive when it rained versus now has dramatically decreased. So that, in my mind, proves success, I guess, in some of those early projects. And then the projects that we're taking flow from our CSOs, overflow points down to the treatment plant, the post-construction monitoring that we've done, all has proven to us that we've been as successful as we thought, or even more successful in some of the results that we've gotten. So, and we're really, our rates are, and I know we'll get to that, but they're projected to be lower than we thought they would be. They're lower now than we thought we would be at. And when we look at what we thought the rate would be at the very end of the long-term control plan, compared to where we think it now will be, we're in a much better situation. So we've been fortunate to get good bids. I know there's been some hard economic times through some of this, which isn't.
People were happy for the work.
Yeah.
Some companies were happy for the work.
Absolutely. I remember bids during some of those periods of time when contractors were putting no cost in these bids for machinery. So if they own the machinery outright, and they just wanted to keep their people busy. So that we were getting very, very good bids through some of that, and have been fortunate. We've been able to capitalize on some of that and get good projects and good pricing on those projects. And we've been fortunate to have good interest rates. So we don't bond every project we do, or have to borrow money for every project, but the larger ones, it ends up being a necessity, but we've been fortunate to get really low interest rates. So the first project here that we're looking at, and some of the last ones, we're capitalizing on 2% interest rates. The open market, so that's through a SRF program, so a state-run program. Again, it's federal dollars that get funneled through the state, and they use that money to buy down the interest rate. So it's a form of a grant. It's not just free money, but it's free money in the form of reduced interest rates. But those projects, the 2% rates, the open market bond rate right now is 3.25, 3.5. So the first project alone, we're saving $1.5 million projected based on the funding mechanism that we're using to do that. So using what we can. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of free money like that out there, especially with our rates being low. So if our rates were a lot higher, there'd be more opportunity for different kinds of programs. But because our rates are low, we're just not eligible for some of that. So.
Okay. What is going to come before the Richmond? You're watching In Focus, by the way, on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. I'm Eric Marsh, speaking with Elijah Welch, engineer for the Richmond Sanitary District, who is asking for money for rate increases to do work. There is a public hearing Monday night, Richmond Common Council meeting. There has been discussion among the Sanitary District Board, which is a meeting that is open to the public, second and fourth Tuesdays of the month, 10 a.m., down at the offices on Liberty Avenue if you ever want to go to those meetings. But Monday night at the Common Council meeting, citizens will have a chance to speak to what it is that you all are asking for. And you're asking for a 35% rate hike. Do I have that number correct?
Yes, it's about 35% over 3 years. Correct.
Which would start at the end of this year, next year, and the following year. So the first of these rates would actually come in pretty quickly.
Yeah, it would be basically it would start in your bills next year would all have the first phase of this rate increase, and then the following year. So that would be all of 2018. The second phase would happen for all of 2019, and then the beginning of 2020. Is when the third phase would take effect.
And this would take you through the end of everything you want to do, or you mentioned a high rate treatment plant at the end. Are you anticipating coming back for money to do that ending piece?
The goal is not to, and really the way things look right now is we wouldn't have to, or if we did, it would be very nominal. We're kind of in a good situation. So we've mentioned before, we've bonded projects in the past. So some of those bonds fall off right before we have to do the high rate treatment facility. So my goal and hope is that as those bonds fall off, it's a large enough project, it would still have to be bonded, but hopefully there's no rate adjustment associated with it. So those bonds fall off, these would take their place basically and keep our rates steady. Now, several things play into that. What happens to construction costs between now and then? What happens to interest rates between now and then? And then what just happens to overall operating expenses between now and then as well. You know, that's one thing that you haven't seen us come ask for is operating cost adjustments. So we've done some things to reduce our operating cost. Some of our work is projected to still reduce it further. One of the treatment plant upgrades that we're doing is our aeration system. We kind of showed a video of that earlier, and how that works. It basically is big blowers and is blowing air up into the wastewater to help with the organisms in there to help treat the wastewater. It needs oxygen, but we're right now using 800 horsepower blowers to blow that air in there. Well, the system is broken down and needs replaced. So as we go to replace that, we're looking at technologies that actually so there on the bottom right is one of our big 800 horsepower blowers, and the picture above it shows the aeration tanks that it blows air into. So the technology has changed since these were originally put in, so we're looking at changing that technology. If we have to replace it anyway, let's replace it with something that has more efficient operations and actually has very good paybacks on some of that. So we're trying to look for those opportunities and the work that we have to do anyway. So our treatment plant work, the whole idea is we have to get back up to our full rated capacity. We're rated for 36, as we said earlier, but really right now we can only push 30 to 32 through there. So we have to get it to 36, and some of these upgrades are all part of getting us to that point. So let's just make sure we're doing it in the right way. We're looking at the whole picture, both the need to be compliant for our CSOs and our plan, but really the need just as a utility run as efficiently as we can. So that's always fun for me to I guess look for those opportunities, and you know, we've been able and fortunate to come across some of those and had some success in doing that. So those are good things to see out of what we're doing. So.
Okay, we're over halfway done with the show, so let's move into what this rate increase is for, what the timetable is, and what you want to do. There are 5 projects.
There are.
I think that have to get done.
Yes, all 5 of these projects are all part of our long-term control plan. The 5 projects, as you see on the screen, we have a couple Interceptor projects. Our Northwest 13th Street Interceptor on the west side of town. 2 treatment plant projects, so we're really taking those and combining them into one project, but they're listed separately within our long-term control plan. But there's some efficiencies in being able to do those together that made sense. So secondary treatment system improvements and final clarifier improvements at our treatment plant. Sewer separation, I mean, that's one of the big pieces of our plan is to separate as much of the sewer system as possible. So we have a sanitary sewer and a storm sewer. And those flows would go to 2 different places, and you're not treating the stormwater, and you're reducing the amount of overflows that we have. This slide just shows a kind of a glimpse of what we have out there and how we've gone about doing that. So we've had a pretty good-sized area of town that we knew had some work done in the early 80s, as we mentioned earlier, but wasn't fully separated. So we did smoke testing, we did dye testing, and went out and did really a lot of investigation because we knew there were still some cross connections and still some homes and businesses and buildings tied to this combined sewer. And in order to turn the combined sewer into a storm sewer and these basins, because there's no other storm sewer out there now, what do we need to separate? And really finding, kind of a needle in a haystack in some of those areas. Older areas like that are really difficult to investigate because things weren't built exactly like we build them today, and a lot of different larger sewers are hard to smoke test and do some of the investigative type work in. So it took a lot of time and effort to get through that process, and so we did that, and we've identified the areas that we still need to separate, and we've actually done a lot of in-house design on some of those separation projects. I mean, that's one of the things that we try to do as much of as possible. I mean, it's not realistic to design every project in-house, but the more we can design in-house, the cheaper it is to do. So and we're also intimately involved in, even if we're having a consultant design some of the larger projects, we're very involved in that process. And I kind of talked about this a little bit when we had a joint meeting with Sanitary District and Council the other night, right. Is to be able to be involved in that process for some of these projects. We've seen really a lot of benefit in that. We're making sure we're getting the best project for our communities. We're getting the biggest bang for our buck. We're seeing sides that maybe all the consultants wouldn't necessarily see because of experiences we've had in this particular area of town, whether it be a maintenance issue or a backup issue. We bring a lot of historical knowledge and have been able to really sit around a table and come up with good solutions to the problems that we're trying to face. So.
As you look at the 5 projects that have to be done, we've talked about the fact that you went before the Common Council a few years ago, asked for a 3-tier rate increase. Right. They denied that. They gave you 2, right. But they didn't give you the 3rd one.
Right.
So what on this list actually got pushed? Because
right.
you got 2, the list still has to be done, so all you did was shift a project back to this point right now, correct?
Correct. So the Northwest 13th Street project was the main project that would have been in the Phase 3, as well as some of the treatment plant work. So both of those things were originally planned to be in that Phase 3 of the last rate increase. So the project didn't go away. I mean, we're still they're still on the schedule. We were able to be flexible enough to move it a little bit further, but now we're back. And ultimately, I mean, one of the things to keep in mind is the cost of money today is cheaper than it will be in the future. So doing projects down the road will ultimately cost us more than doing projects today. So we try to look at multiple things as we really look at capital improvements as a whole, but at our long-term control plan as well. Making sure we're doing projects in the right order to build off each other, but at the same time doing them to keep our rates as low as possible for the long run as well.
We talked about what some of the citizens have seen from some of the projects that you've done in the past, people's basements not overflowing,
right.
things that. What is it that we're seeing now in this community that we may not see in 10 years if these are done? What kind of overflows, what kind of water is standing in places? What is this going to help?
So there's a couple projects, the Northwest 13th Street project and the West Side Interceptor project, that if you drive around town to certain areas when it rains, you will see overflows. So there's an overflow in the cemetery along 40, and I think there's a slide that shows some of this. May even have some video of some of these overflows, but yeah, so that's in the cemetery. You can see the creek has risen, but up on the upper left side, that is one of our manholes that overflows.
The bubbling that's back up in the top
exactly,
left-hand corner.
Right.
Okay.
So that's one of several locations along that particular interceptor. There's another one downstream, and there's some other ones upstream that overflow. This is the West Side Interceptor, so along Simhodgen Parkway.
Now, I've seen this during heavy rains.
Yeah, and you've probably driven through it.
Yes, because it runs down the hill and it runs across the road. There's no way
right.
not to drive through it.
Right.
You're saying that's a sanitary overflow.
It is. That's a sanitary sewer overflow, so it has both stormwater and sanitary sewage in it, and it comes out of the top of that and flows across the Simhodgen Parkway. So that will be an overflow that is taken care of as we complete these projects. And again, that's an overflow. It's not at a permitted point. Actually, neither of those were, but they're at locations where just the water rises to a point where the manhole's low enough and it comes out. So you can see, yeah, this is the West Side Interceptor. And I think the slide that you just had up there was the Northwest 13th Street. We have another overflow location up by the state hospital at the soccer fields. I mean, that's to me a important area where we have student athletes out there practicing and playing, and we have an overflow location on the south edge of their fields and that facility. So to me, again, an important reason to do this, whether or not we were mandated to do it or not. I think it's the responsible thing as a utility, both for environment and just human health, to take care of some of the problems that we have. So
you've got to convince Common Council that you need the money to do these projects for the bonds for a 3-year period, but not only do you have to convince the Common Council, you have to convince me,
absolutely,
us,
right.
the citizens. So what is your take to us that says, one, you've been a good steward of the money that you've had so far, and two, you're not going to waste what we give you in the future to get this done?
Absolutely, and I hope history kind of speaks for itself in the projects that we've done, in that we've seen benefit. I hope the public sees it. And we were talking earlier about the paper. When it rained, you would have all these overflows, and you still have overflows, but they don't happen as frequently as they do, or as they did in the past. So we don't have basement backups, which honestly is reduced insurance claims on our end as well. And then just from a human health, environmental impact. I mean, we have overflows that are going into, if it's not going to somebody's basement, it's going out across the road or in the river, in the soccer fields. I mean, things like that just I think are things that should be done anyway, as just good stewards for our community, and for the people that are here. Moving forward, I think the plan that we've come up with is a plan that, one, has looked at a lot of different options. I mean, looked at different funding mechanisms, and tried to balance the ability to pay for as much as possible with the cash that we have on hand, and just from a rate standpoint, a pay-as-you-go type of philosophy. So we've done as much as we could with that, and at the same time trying to balance some of the larger projects that you don't have the cash. We don't have 10, 15, 20, these projects, these 5 projects total about $29 million. We don't have $29 million to just pay for them. So we have to use some other kind of mechanism in these loans or bonds to be able to pay for those projects now and then pay them back over a period of time. And I definitely don't like to borrow any more money than we have to, and we've tried to look at the projects we do borrow on are projects that would be eligible for the lowest possible interest rate out there, and really capitalize on those types of programs. So I think a lot of thought has went into balancing how we go about implementing the projects, how we go about implementing the funding, and trying to do it in a way that isn't burdensome upon the community. And don't get me wrong, it is. This is the one part of my job that I do not look forward to. I like the analytics behind it, but when it comes down to asking for more money, and you can ask people in my office, I'm cheap. And maybe cheap's not the most appropriate term, but
frugal works.
Yeah, I don't like to spend money when we don't have to, and I like to get the biggest possible bang for our buck and do more than what we thought was possible with what we have. And it's really a challenge for me, and it's something that I enjoy trying to get the most out of these projects and do them for as little as possible. And I think the outlook that we have now for our rates at the end of the long-term control plan is positive, and I think that's another reflection of where we've come so far and what we've been able to do so far. Is our rates were projected to be, at the end, about $78 for an average user. And now we're projected to be under $50 for an average user. That is a significant difference.
Let's talk. I think you have a slide, or you've talked in a couple of different places about where the rates are. And one of the things everybody is concerned, obviously, one, no one wants their household budget to go up.
Sure.
But two, are we competitive so that when businesses are thinking about landing someplace, are our rates driving them away, whether it's sewer rates, electric rates, whatever the case may be?
Absolutely.
So talk the absolute dollars as to where we are and where you think we're going to end up. Can you do that?
Yeah, and we've got a slide, I think, that we can show that compares our rates, and really we're comparing our future rates. So we're proposing a 3-phase rate increase, and the red lines show where we're at now and where we would be at the end of the 3 phases, each phase.
Okay, so Richmond current looks like about $32.09, according to that slide, is where we are right now.
Correct. So phase 1 is $37.13. Phase 2 is just under $40, $39.96, and then phase 3 is $43.44.
Okay, phase 2 puts us, somebody close to us, just above Muncie.
Yes, yeah. So another community of similar size, somebody we might compete with for projects. And one thing that, sewer rates are important when it comes to the types of industry that we're looking at to attract. So we've been able to attract food industry, which has high loading, and typically are larger users at the sanitary district. So, we're very cognizant of wanting to stay competitive when it comes to other people. So as we look at our phase 3, that puts us in the middle of this pack. And again, there's hundreds of communities in Indiana, but we try to look at, Anderson's down there too, just above kind of where we're at right now. But the thing to think about is we're looking at their current rates and we're comparing to where we're going to be in 3 years. And if we're projecting...
So that top line after phase 3, you're saying when phase 3 is done, that's where our rates will be, but that's in comparison to where people are at this moment today.
Exactly.
And some of those communities still have this work to do.
Exactly. These communities are some of them are also CSO communities. They have the same type of long-term control plan, and rates in general are all going up as those plans get implemented. So I don't know where they're all at in their plan, but in talking with different engineering consultants and financial consultants, everybody's still got more to do. And if we can sit here and say after this round of rate increases, we're going to be in a really good position to not have to come back and ask for additional rate adjustment for the work in our plan. That puts us in a pretty good position because a lot of communities won't be in that position. I mean, they're going to see rate increases for the foreseeable future until these plans are done, and a lot of them are on the same type of schedule as we are. 20-year implementation. So. Whether they happened a year before or after us, I mean, it's all fairly similar when it comes to schedule standpoint. So it's really a positive outlook, and I've spoken with the chamber and actually received this week a letter of support from the Chamber of Commerce. We met with their issues and advocacy committee. Really wanted to show them our plan, and we met with them before, and they came and issued a letter of support, which to me speaks a lot into how we set up the plan. I mean, from the business community standpoint, being able to come and get behind a rate adjustment that's going to cost you more money, to me is a big thing. So, I trying to run it as efficiently and effectively as possible, and hopefully like some of the businesses as well. So trying to keep it lean and efficient. So have that. We've also spoken with EDC, one of their committees, the Industrial Park Committee, and so we presented and had a good conversation. And one of the things that they felt important is really showcasing to these businesses that come in and look at our community is, hey, we have the assets in place to be able to market our community to you. And you know, if there weren't sewers in the Midwest Industrial Park available to these community or to these businesses that are looking to locate here, right, they wouldn't locate here. You know, Blue Buffalo was a great example. We're able to serve them, and really that's a benefit for East Central Indiana. So just more things like that. You know, the more we talk with different groups, you know, the more positive things that we're hearing, and really things that I think they've come away feeling pretty good about where we're at and where we project on to be in the future. So
we're down to our last few minutes here. Councilman Lopeman, at the end of that, the committee of the whole meeting with Sanitary, made the statement that the question that he is asked most by his constituents is, when will the rates come back down? We know where you say they're going to be at the end of phase 3, and you still have some work to do. There's been conversation about the sanitary district giving money back to the community. How do you all in-house answer that question and think about a question like that? Sure.
Well, I think just as a utility, it's our responsibility to, every few years, evaluate the rates that we have. I mean, my thought would be at the end of, you know, as bonds fall off or wherever we're at in that process, it's prudent for us to do an analysis and see where our rates should be based on the current operating cost, the current capital projections that our needs. We talked earlier about how old our system is in some capacity, and really we've got, what, 330 miles of sewer, over 10,000 structures, and a lot of them, like 65 or 66 miles, are over 100 years old. And so it costs money to maintain those as well. So while I'm not going to try to predict exactly where we're going to be at the end of this, I think there'll be a time, and really on a continual basis, an analysis done of where we're at and where we need to be, and adjustments would be made accordingly. You know, the other thing that we talk about is we've not come back and asked for cost of service or just cost increases because the cost of doing business goes up. You know, chemical cost increase, sure, all of this other stuff that we have to pay goes up. So just that means that the rates we have are not going as far as they had in the past. So, you know, there's a lot of things that play into exactly where we will end up being. But I again, just think as a utility, you know, we'll do that analysis and you know, be able to present that to council and the community, and if rates need to be adjusted, you know, I'm all for making those adjustments as necessary. So
you're a numbers guy. You mentioned that we have 330 or so miles of sewer running around the city. A lot of it 100 years old. Once these projects are done, about how much of that sewer will not have been touched by any of these projects?
A big portion of it. So, you know, some of the projects we're doing, the good thing is, I guess, our major interceptors for the most part will have been touched in some way or another. They won't all have been replaced, but some of them will have been replaced, and that'll be good for us in the long run, because as we design these, we're designing for our future. We're designing for build out that could happen, so we're not coming back in 5, 10, 20 years and saying, hey, we don't have enough capacity for this company to come in and build this facility. We need to build a sewer to it. So the sewer will be there or will be close to where it is. So the cost of that goes down. But there's a lot of these smaller sewers that won't be touched at all. So we're working right now actually and collecting the data to be able to put together a program, a rehabilitation program, to analyze what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and it will look at the condition of the sewers and the risk associated with failure, because the cost to repair a failed sewer is a lot more than the cost to rehabilitate a sewer before it fails. So we want to be proactive in our approach in managing the assets that we have. And it takes time to collect that data and really generate a spreadsheet or database to be able to analyze all that data. But as we move forward, we'll get better and better answers and be able to be confident that where we're putting our rehabilitation dollars, which really isn't in the long-term control plan, but something that as a utility we have to do to keep our assets in good working order. But it'll be important to be able to know where to put those dollars and maximize the benefit from those. So,
Elijah, thank you.
Yeah, thank
I
you
don't want
for
to
the
say
opportunity to
good
come.
luck, because I'm like everybody else and I don't want my rates to go up, but I understand the process and I understand what you've gone through. And you're a homeowner and a business owner,
Absolutely.
so I'm sure it affects you the same way it affects everybody else. So yeah, I'm sure you want to keep the rates as low as
Absolutely, it is. Again, this is not a fun process, and I wouldn't be asking if I didn't feel like it was the best thing for us as a community and as a sanitary district. So
I appreciate you taking the time to come in and explain.
Thanks for
it to
having me.
us. Not a problem. Want to remind you that we will air a replay of a previous program next week, but then in 2 weeks we've got a special 90-minute In Focus program designed to answer your questions. If you have a question about the opioid problem, epidemic, how it can be controlled, how you can help, what resources are available for you, family members, whatever your question, send it to us. WCTV@iue.edu on the 26th of this month. We'll have a live program with members from Reed Health, Centerstone, and Meridian Health Services, and they will be answering your questions. Some of the other things that are taking place, it's the Halloween season, so if you have not had a chance to go through the Witch in the Woods, the auto tour at Hayes Arboretum, check that out. That goes through the 28th of the month. Always doing Halloween well. I didn't realize how well till I went through there last year. Wayne County Historical Museum, Haunted Museum, 6:30 to 9 p.m., October 13th and 14th. Then again, the 20th and 21st, 1150 North A Street. Definitely check them out. The season continues for the Richmond Symphony Orchestra. Michael at the keys, Michael Chertok. He has been in Richmond before. His performances are always enjoyed. October 14th, 7:30 p.m. at Civic Hall. Check out richmondsymphony.org if you need more information on Michael at the keys. Food preservation classes taking place courtesy of Sprout of Control. Those are free. October 14th, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Lunch is provided. Child care is provided. Check out their website, sproutofcontrol.org, for more information. The CEC Fall Foliage 5 and 10K takes place on Saturday, 9 a.m. at the Cope Environmental Center. There is a website there on the screen if you want to register, and normally they take registrations the day of the race. Fall Break Camp at Cope Environmental Center happens. It's fall break, and they get almost a week. You got to find something to do with the kids. Check this out, October 16th through the 20th, 9:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Phone number on the screen for more information, and you can still vote until Monday, October 16th. ReadBravo.org, definitely helping out with women getting their mammograms. And lastly, we're going to talk about the Centerville Public Library. If you like to make art, relax after school with a fun art project, Monday, October 16th, 5:30 to 6 p.m. for grades K through 6. Want to again thank our guest for being here. We hope you will send your questions to us at WCTV@iue.edu for our show that's coming up on the 26th. We thank you very much for watching this program. Have a good night.